Hello, I'm Will Mountford. Welcome to Research Pod. In trying times, we all look for leadership. This can be true of families and households, across a professional team, or on grander scales. But those leadership skills have to come from somewhere. Understanding how, where, and why these skills develop is an important part of the continuing journey to more inclusive and collaborative leadership practice. Today, I'm speaking with Dr. Nicola Patterson, Dr. Amy Stabler, and Professor Sharon Mavin about the program they lead at Newcastle University Business School. The MSc in Strategic Leadership course seeks to engage with leadership learners in a critical way so as to unlearn traditional norms of leadership and open new approaches to foster inclusive, sustainable, and reflexive leadership practices. And joining me from Newcastle University Business School is Amy, Sharon, and Nicola. Hello to all of you.
Hello.
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 Just by way of introductions, if I could work my way through the list, Amy, if you could tell me a bit about yourself first, and then Nicola, and then Sharon.
Hello. My name's Dr. Amy Stabler, and I am a senior lecturer at Newcastle University Business School. I specialise in leadership development, and I research both leadership development and coaching and mentoring.
Hello, I'm Dr. Nicola Patterson. I'm a senior lecturer at Newcastle University Business School in Leadership Development and Organisation Futures. And I'm interested in leadership development, experiences of gender, and particularly the experiences of women in entrepreneurship.
I'm Sharon Mavin. I'm Professor of Leadership and Organisation Studies at Newcastle University Business School. And my research interests are obviously leadership and organisation, but also particularly issues of difference and women in leadership.
The conversation today is centered around a project that you have all been working on about leadership development for business leaders. But just to kind of set some terms and set a little bit of background, could I ask why it is important to think about developing leaders in an academic sense rather than letting people loose and seeing how they grow in a very organic way and just figuring things out as you go?
So in terms of exposure in leadership development in universities and university business schools, I guess we would argue that the key benefit in that type of leadership learning is exposure to all of our latest research, not just our research, but also research from the leadership community worldwide, so that we can draw upon that research and engage with our leadership learners in terms of their own practice in organizations. We realised that leadership development for strategic leadership, particularly with post-experience learners, we realised that what we were facilitating is unique and should be more prevalent. So we wanted to share our practice and to provide a provocation on how to do leadership learning differently.
I think sharing that practice now is really timely in terms of the context that we're in. We're in a post-pandemic space. Some of the conversations that have been happening and the experiences that have been had locally, nationally, and globally make what we do and how we do very relevant, and to stay curious not just about the content in which we deliver, but actually how we deliver this in terms of leadership and leadership development.
When we were creating this pedagogy and this approach to management development and leadership development, we were really thinking about how could we create a method, a way of providing leadership development that actually moved with the context as it changed. Because one of the things that I'm conscious of, having worked in leadership development for about 30 years in different, both as a private provider within organisations, is it tends to get stale very quickly and not move, not have the ability to move with the learner's context as it emerges.
Center things around the most recent publication we're all talking about today is a paper on flipping the normative and flipping the status quo. So what is the status quo? What is critical management pedagogy? Let's go over some terms, a bit of a glossary, and start from the average, the normal, what is expected, what is current, and then from there we can look at what needs to change.
So if we're looking at the norm, then the modern leadership development approach, private providers and business schools tend to teach students to play with models and numbers so that they approach leadership as if it was rational and objective, with a recipe or a list of things to do to be a strategic leader or to be a leader. So that these types of normative leadership development approaches focus on mastering techniques to improve performance and profit, and perhaps to advance individuals' career prospects, rather than taking a more critical approach. And they tend to ignore how leadership is a social, relational activity about people.
So I can pick up there, if it's helpful, about what we mean by critical management education or critical leadership development, and the title of the paper about flipping the normative. And the key concept for us in the paper is that we flip this norm that Sharon's just described by unsettling the assumptions that underpin it and inviting learners to do that with us and questioning, why is leadership done that way? Why do I do leadership that way? And could I do it differently in relation to other people? And recognizing, again, picking up the point that I made earlier about context, that context demands of a leader in situ all the time to be making choices in volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous environments. So that questioning is very helpful on an everyday basis when leaders are practicing. So I'm going to hand over to Nicola at this point to say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think in practice, probably a really useful example in some of the conversations that I have with learners that come on this program is, one of the first things I say to them is, if you want to come on a program that tells you how to be a strategic leader, this isn't the program for you. So the majority of normative leadership programs have really heavily relied on individual heroic models of leadership, of what an individual should or could be in senior strategic leadership roles. But this program flips that, because we're not about creating a carbon copy or a factory line of strategic leaders that look the same. Instead, this pedagogy, we really help you to peel back the layers of who you are, that go well beyond your values, to your core belief system, to understand who you are as the human, who you are as the leadership practitioner, so you can develop your unique individual strategic leadership lens that you take as part of your everyday leadership practice. So the whole aim through this program long pedagogy is to develop socially responsible leaders who can influence and shape their everyday practice, the practice of others, working together at more of an organizational, professional level, and that macro level of society, so they can actually shape and see the contribution that they can make from the micro, the meso to the macro level.
And just to add another example of that, in terms of taking the critical pedagogy, we support learners to challenge the normative discourses that are around us all the time. For example, neoliberalism, and how neoliberalism shapes us with its fixation on performance, perfection, and profit, rather than creating or shaping us around positive social impact and doing leadership differently.
Few things that, if I imagine in different research contexts, either in engineering or biology, where the process of research is really quite more iterative. You mentioned a production line of people, that if you are building new devices or designing new medicines or molecules, it is very much about better performance, better fit, and it is kind of always forwards. Does that sit at any kind of odds or tension or maybe even adversity with how people expect to go into a learning course and development? Is there any kind of like a challenge to themselves if they aren't ready to do this kind of reflection and reflexive practice?
Well, we can start by thinking of our critical pedagogy, flipping the normative by doing the unexpected and disrupting the status quo. And we're very clear with learners right from the beginning, from the first time they inquire about coming to join the program, that it is a different learning process. Do you want to extend that, Nicola?
So in terms of how we do what we do, we've got a really clear learning philosophy to the program that really anchors not just the learners, but us as the academic team that deliver this program. So we always talk about there are three simultaneous elements to this process. There's the content that we as the academics bring to this program, that we curate and provide. That's our job. There's the context which we expect the learners to bring, their context. We assume that they're immersed in an ocean of practice and we want them to bring that to the program. I always say to learners, there's no free passengers in this program. You need to share a little bit of who you are as the human and your leadership practice to the extent where you feel comfortable. But that's supported and held by the learning process that we design and we hold the content and the context in. Now, that's really important in terms of the tensions because it's the process that anchors us and the learners. It's as we talk through the paper, you'll see that sometimes there are freakouts, there are moments for us as academics in the learning space where we think, oh no, is this do we need to really trust the process that we've designed because this is different, and as a result we will have unexpected experiences in the classroom, either in person or online. The learners will have an unexpected experience in terms of, even though we talk about that this is different at the beginning, regardless of what the learners have been briefed and inducted in, this is not the norm. So we keep bringing learners back to this learning philosophy of the content, the context, and the process. And it's trusting that process, that learning design in which we hold them in. And that process, this is a blended, flexible program. So we blend the learning. We anchor learners in the online space. That's where the knowledge acquisition takes place, so that when we come together in this social learning process, either in person or online, we have that rich depth of learning where we can together, alongside the learners, make sense of the new knowledge that they have in relation to their organisational context and their individual practice. So the blend is really important, but the flexibility of how we've designed the programme in terms of the online space where that knowledge acquisition happens, we release that content weekly. The program team that has designed the program long pedagogy have a real depth of understanding of what it's like to be a work-based learner, have delivered and been part of blended learning, but understanding the need for flexibility is so imperative. So we release the weekly learning, but we curate for the learner and highlight to them what's time sensitive to keep them on track. So we can keep them on track by outlining something that they have to watch, something that they have to read, and something that they have to do to try and meet as many different approaches to learning that would suit different learners. So we do that weekly. And so that's just one example of how we do that to manage that process and hold them in one of those elements of that learning philosophy.
And at the beginning, there is a tension because we are asking learners to unlearn their expectations of what leadership is and of what learning is. So, we do challenge the standard models and prescriptions, and we do challenge the power dynamics. And as Amanda Sinclair expresses delivery of critical pedagogy, it can be heaven and hell because it is hard challenging assumptions and peeling away different layers of defensiveness to see the world differently. And we can have pushback from learners as we go through this process.
Yeah, there's a lot of negotiation in it, actually. I think as academics, we have to be willing to negotiate, talk about expectations, and really help navigate learners through that, as well as navigating ourselves at the same time.
And could you walk me through maybe just some of the personal reflection that goes into the development of the course and what that means in terms of reflexivity? I understand that reflexivity, reflexive practice, and personal reflection are all slightly different angles. So what that meant for you as the course designers, administrators, how that kind of changes your own process going through it in the setup, and then with the delivery and everything that comes through feedback around it as well.
So our approach to leadership development through critical pedagogy really moves on from personal reflection. Learners tend to arrive thinking they can do personal reflection, it's all fine. And we introduce something completely different for them. We develop psychologically safe enough spaces where learning is emotional, and we'll talk about embodied and emotional learning where we can feel it in our body. We ask them to reconceptualize vulnerability from weakness to strength, and we support them to develop reflexive practice following Paul Hibbert's framework, so that we ask ourselves as academics and the learners to see ourselves continually in relation to other people, not as a robot who's rational and objective, but with someone who is in relation to power dynamics, who may or may not have position power at certain times and may or may not have privilege, but to challenge our assumptions, understand our own story, our personal values. What is our moral compass and where does it come from? And how do we challenge those expectations of how we should behave to how we want to behave? So that this process of reflexivity, once we get into a rhythm of reflexive practice, we can't stop doing it, so that we begin to question and challenge our assumptions as we go through that program.
Picking up a point that Sharon was making about social learning and social relational learning being at the center of this pedagogy, I think the point about one of the key points about reflexivity is it has to involve other people. So we do invite learners to be reflexive together and to unsettle each other's assumptions. So that I think is very different to a model of personal reflection, which is very much focused on self, focused on an individual perspective of the world, whereas we're actually inviting a collaborative, collective reflexivity, which we have as a team of academics as well. So again, in terms of the setup of the program and the way that we developed the pedagogy, it was very much in talking it through in dialogue, challenging each other's assumptions about what we were doing and what we are doing, and we continue to do that as we go forward, and writing this paper was part of that. It was very interesting for us as we wrote the paper, some of the reflexive moments where we challenged each other's assumptions about how we were making meaning in writing the paper. So you can see it's a thread that informs everything in both the paper and the program in the way it unfolds for academics and learners.
Dr. Stabler, there was one acronym in the paper that leapt out to me: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, which, I mean, that's a lot of words which don't seem like a very comfortable place to be developing as a person or to have any real safety for development at all. Could you tell me a bit about what that meant for business development, personal development, and where it fits into the scope and the schedule of this course?
I think it was one of the key phrases, if you like, that came up. It's actually a business phrase that's used quite often, VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And it was a theme that we had in our minds when we were designing the program, about the fact that organizations, businesses have to change day by day in response to unexpected circumstances. So if you think of the pandemic as one massive example of that happened shortly after we had been starting to talk about VUCA as a common theme for business development and leadership development. Everything changed overnight, and businesses simply had to respond, and the people in businesses simply had to respond. So our program was really thinking about what does that demand of people when they're confronted with a VUCA environment day to day, and that actually that creates a level of vulnerability for people who are trying to manage that changing environment on a day-to-day basis. And how do we support learners on a leadership development program to become comfortable with that level of discomfort that's provoked by being in uncertainty all the time? So again, to return back to what Sharon said at the beginning about normed programs, treat leaders as a technical, rational object, if you like, to develop, where there are certain processes and principles that if you follow them, then X, Y, and Z will happen. We recognise that's actually not at all the case. You're often confronted with real messiness in work, and we wanted to invite people to really think about that with us and to experience it in a safe way within the programme. I don't know, Nicola, do you want to speak a bit more about what that raises in terms of psychological safety in the programme?
So creating psychologically safe enough environments is really important and has been from the very beginning. And it's part of the process element of the learning philosophy that we keep talking about in the way in which this critical pedagogy is designed. So it's important for us that learners feel safe enough, and we always say enough. We can't guarantee 100% safety, but we want to create a safe enough environment where they feel comfortable to share a bit of who they are as a human and their practical and practice experiences. So we create ground rules, psychologically safe enough ground rules that we share with the learners. They have an opportunity to add to that, and at times we have added perhaps an addition to those ground rules. But it's about making sure that not just the learners, but us as the academic team, anybody who is in a learning environment, feels safe enough. So it's not just about the learners, it's about the colleagues as well, any academics or any people that come into our learning space, whether that be in person, online in a live session, or even as part of discussion boards that might be happening asynchronously online, that they understand what the boundaries are and how they should treat and take care of the people and the experiences that are shared.
I think we use that creation of safe spaces that Nicola's talking about to allow the learners to gradually become more and more vulnerable and share with each other their real experience, as opposed to their the experience they feel they have to portray at work, but their real experience of work and the things that they're tangling with on a day-to-day basis. And we do that very gradually through the program so that they become vulnerable when they choose to. We give them lots of different spaces and opportunities to do that on an individual basis with their personal tutor, in small groups, in action learning, in the online and in person, in the room, in order to learn to trust each other and to trust us as educators. And we become increasingly vulnerable with them as we go through that process as well. And one of the key themes from the paper is identifying vulnerability as a strength, which flips the normal understanding of vulnerability as a weakness in leadership and in business. So that is one of the key themes of the program, that actually by becoming vulnerable and becoming confident with your vulnerability and how to share that in an appropriate and boundaried way, the learners become more resilient in this VUCA workplace that we're talking about. So it is an ongoing process, and one that we as academics, and I think there's a piece in the paper where one of the academics writes in their reflexive diary about feeling really worried about was a learner safe enough to say something at a particular point in time, or they said something that actually might have embarrassed another learner, and the emotions and embodied experience that the academic has alongside the learner of that increasing vulnerability shared.
To echo some of the early comments that we had around the tension about it, is that vulnerability something that everybody is open to, is receptive to, or is there ever, well, you don't have to name names or anything, but has there been pushback about overcoming that boundary, opening that vulnerability of yourself, and if anyone just won't do that?
I think what our philosophy is that, and I'll pass to Sharon in a moment, what our philosophy is that people share what they're ready to share and where they're up to, and there's space for people to take it at different pace and space. And actually what's interesting psychologically is the invitation of the collective reflexivity is very powerful, that people who feel very resistant and hold back a lot at the beginning, eventually we don't have to push them. We invite them to come through and join in the process. Sharon, what do you think of that?
I guess I was going to echo or extend what you said there, Amy, that it's a 2-year part-time blended process where we don't expect learners to fully engage, on their first day back at school, so to speak. This is a designed process which takes them through a journey, I guess, where they, as Amy said, they can choose. And the more trust they build up with each other, which they do, and with us, through the various exercises we ask them to prepare and to come and discuss in the learning spaces, that's what develops confidence and, I guess, resilience to be able to decide what they want to share and why. But that is a transformative learning process in terms of their engagement with that.
And I don't think we've ever had anybody in the 4 cohorts that we've had not engage in it at some level in the way that's right for them. And I think, again, we're very sensitive in thinking, is that the right level for this person at this time in their life, in their professional development? So again, we don't have a one size fits all. They must come out at the end in this way when they've done the learning with us. We're watching and seeing and thinking, yeah, that's probably enough. That's good enough.
And maybe just quickly an example of how this all looks in practice.
So an example that came out of the data with the academics as to how we flip the normative through the critical pedagogy is when teaching strategy. Anybody who has been taught strategy may describe it as being death by PowerPoint. PowerPoints of the same old strategic models of if you do X, Y, and Z, then you have a strategy, off you go, it can work. One of the academics described how they focus on situated individual experiences because for each of the learners, their experiences are unique to them in their organisation. The learners are asked to focus on their own thinking and behaving and become aware of their beliefs and values that form the basis for their leadership practice and to question those assumptions and surface some of the taken for granted rules around how strategy should be done or shouldn't be done. And only then are they asked to consider their organisation's strategy, asked to consider, do they see themselves as strategic, and what is their relationship with strategy work? How do they see themselves in relation to others around developing strategy or implementing strategy in organisations? So the death by PowerPoint just doesn't happen in this critical pedagogy. After the initial cohort of leadership learners had graduated and we had success indicators, then we made the decision that I, as someone who hadn't designed the programme but did deliver on it, would interview 5 members of the academic team who were asked to outline how they understood the pedagogy, how they developed the pedagogy, how they operationalise it, and how they felt the pedagogy challenges normative expectations of how leaders should be. And at the same time, the academics also kept their own reflexive diaries throughout delivering the programme, and these were also analysed. So Nicola, and Amy were two of the academics who were interviewed in order to get the data for the paper.
Dr. Stabler, could you tell me what that was like to be on the other side of the table there?
It was really nice, actually, because having spent a lot of time developing the pedagogy, to have someone ask questions who hadn't been involved actually created some awareness of things that we'd done that I hadn't perhaps seen at the time, and gave me a greater depth of understanding of perhaps some of the practices that had brought the pedagogy to life. And I think having already kept reflexive diaries while we were creating the programme as part of our kind of development practice, to then repurpose them to be used for the research was also really gratifying, to see that something that you have created to support your own practice then becomes an instrument of some really in-depth research was really rewarding for me personally. And we also, I think something else that we did, Sharon, if I'm correct, we had reflexive conversations about the information. So as a kind of double loop check on what we were learning. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we were reflexive in the doing of the research as well as the doing of the programme development. So if you like, that next loop of reflexivity, we talked about what we were finding as we were going along. And those conversations were fabulous. They were really interesting. And again, gave us some ideas about ways to continue to develop the programme.
And how would you say this kind of curriculum design compares to other courses where, modules might not have been changed for years? Maybe some of the professionals involved haven't been changed for even longer than that. Does it reflect something about kind of the developments that you as staff have as the course itself develops?
I suppose it speaks to the way that we've designed the philosophy, that we're learning as an academic team, we're learning with them. So we kind of expect that, and maybe other people don't expect that we expect to learn alongside them. So I suppose the way that we've designed this pedagogy as a program long critical pedagogy is that we create space and have an expectation that we will learn alongside with them. So when we talk about the learning philosophy of the content, the context, and the process, we as an academic team only stay relevant in terms of our practice by engaging. It's one way we can help to increase the relevance and contextual appropriateness of our practice knowledge by engaging in this space. So I think we never assume, and this is where the power dynamic shifts in terms of this critical pedagogy all of the time. So we might have the power in terms of how we decide and curate the content. We have that power. We select what's in, what's out in a particular element and parts of the overall program. But in terms of what the context that's brought, we expect to be surprised, and we want to be surprised because that's what's progressive with this type of pedagogy. And I think the way that we've designed the philosophy, but also the way that we hold in the process, it doesn't mean to say it's easy when it happens. It can catch us off guard, and even though we know what might happen, it doesn't make the experience of it any more or less comfortable. But I think that we hope and expect that will happen. So we invite that almost.
So introducing power and privilege into the classroom, into the learning space with leadership learners is a way that we get to uncover all types of experiences of difference. If we have a safe enough space for learning and we talk openly about power and privilege, particularly white privilege, but also how the learner's power is unstable in different situations in their lives, and how gender, class, race, neurodiversity, sex, religion, ability differences can actually destabilize people's power and privilege in their personal lives and in organizations. and how this is certainly privilege is a fragile thing. So if you're in a leadership position, you think you have position power, but actually it's fragile, it's unstable.
And so then, for the course design of 2024-2025, already locked in stone and good to go?
Yes, we're all ready to go. This is our 4th iteration. Is that right, Nicola? Nicola's the programme director. 5th iteration of the programme. Wow, time flies. We actually launched the programme during the pandemic year. So 2020 was the first year of the programme, and it was a really interesting experience to see how easy it was to turn the pedagogy fully online, and then we moved back into sometimes online, sometimes in person, which is the way that we designed the program. It's a hugely flexible program design.
I think we actually designed this program pre-pandemic. So what's interesting is we've had 3 different program designs, although we've delivered 2. One that was fully online and then a different blend. So I think what's been really important for us and has really shaped the program is that the learner voice is at the centre. So we always, because as a program team, we have experience and we understand work-based learning, but we're not work-based learners right now. So the way that we have the support infrastructure we have as most universities will have, a staff student committee where learners can voice and share their thoughts, the strengths and weaknesses of the program. But actually, the way that we've designed the program, we've got a really tight, close personal tutoring system with the academics. And it's through that we can really get a close, individualized perspective of how things are going for the learners, so that before it gets to that committee meeting, we can shape and influence what works, what isn't working in a way that works for them. The time sensitive activities that we now release weekly was from a learner suggestion. We almost forget that, but it was kind of from the first few weeks. One of the learners just said, I kind of just want to know what are the key priorities, kind of what do I need? What are the 3 things that I need to do? And that really got us thinking. But we did that was so early on at the beginning that we almost forget that wasn't us. That was listening to the learners. We're growing and have been growing the program. What's special about the program is the selection and really holding dear the diversity of the individuals and the organisations that come on the program. That dynamic and making sure every single individual that comes on the program appreciates the learning philosophy but understands their role in the pedagogy is really, really important, because otherwise it doesn't work, because social learning is at the heart. So we will always have small cohorts. That's really important. So we are growing and have been growing since the beginning to a cohort of up to 40. That's in terms of how and whether we grow with more cohorts, that's up to perhaps senior leaders in the university as to how they can support and resource that growth.
I think one of the key things that has changed is that we began knowing that we were an all-women white academic team, and we designed diversity into the team, into the program, the critical pedagogy. And over the 4 years, the 4 cohorts that we've had, our cohorts have become more diverse, so that actually we have to do less design and we have more present real diversity, which to me, excuse me, shows how leadership is changing, that leadership is becoming more diverse, and that the inclusion and belonging and diversity piece of leadership is even more critical. So I would say we've also focused much more on inclusion and belonging over the past 2 cohorts, to ensure that those in leadership understand what inclusion and belonging mean, but also that we do it in reality during this program.
I think the other theme that's perhaps become emphasised increasingly, along with inclusion and belonging is the theme of sustainability, which again was in the programme at the beginning, and we were quite, I think, we were very purposeful that it needed to be right throughout the pedagogy and appear in both the teaching materials and assignments. But I think it's become much more integrative in terms of the way that we invite them to talk about the sustainability in practice on a day-to-day basis, rather than a sort of add-on. We talk about for example, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and we have that as a kind of organising schema at the beginning, but that's quite out there, and we bring it very close in terms of people's practice, and to the fact that when they finish the programme, they will write a large piece of work and have to explicitly say how they're speaking to sustainability and what element of it their practice is particularly focused on. And that might actually be diversity as one of the key sustainable development goals.
Well, reflecting on everything we've talked about so far and everything that's covered in the course as it grows, who should be listening to this podcast, do you think? What do you want them to have taken away from hearing you talk and learning more about the course, and where can they go to find out more about you?
Those listening to the podcast will hopefully be curious about how to do leadership development and leadership differently as a subjective relational practice with others that can be emancipatory and not power-driven, and can be achieved by developing people, not robots, and developing self-awareness in relation to others, not through dot-to-dot functional models. So we're hoping that those who are listening might be from organizations who, if they're considering investment in leadership development, they could be more curious about what approaches private providers and business schools use to develop leadership learners beyond reputation. They could be considering their own organizational context of continuous change and ambiguity, and their public declarations around social justice, grand challenges, and actually look for leadership development that does do things differently. If we only do what we've always done, we'll get the same result. So our provocation for those who are listening is that we do need new approaches to leadership development. And a critical pedagogy is definitely one approach to achieve that.
If people would like to find out more information, of course, they can look at the Flipping the Normative paper, which is in the Journal of Management Learning. And if people would like to know more and understand more about the programmes themselves, so the MSc in Strategic Leadership and the Level 7 Senior Leader Apprenticeship that we deliver, please make your way to the Newcastle University website and Newcastle University Business School.
As an academic, as a teaching academic, I really have felt more resilient through working collectively. So I would invite academics and those who manage academics or structure the way that teaching is delivered in business schools around leadership development, really think about the importance of a team-based approach for delivering a really high quality leadership development experience through their programs, and it creates more resilient academics, as I've found myself, but also creates resilience in the learners too. So certainly we have the evidence now for some more research that we've done with learners coming out of the program, which is the basis of another paper that we'll be publishing in the future, is really to demonstrate how much more resilient and able to continue in their leadership practice our learners are. Nicola, did you want to add anything?
I think in terms of just adding to the learner individual perspective, what they should think about, if you're thinking about and looking at what's got you to where you are in your current leadership journey, or you're at the beginning of your leadership journey, and you know where you want to go next, but you're not sure how to get there, this might be the program to help you to do that, in terms of looking at what the tools are in your leadership toolbox currently. And if you're willing to make space and get rid of some of what's got you here and served you well, to then add some new tools that we could offer you on the program to really help you understand at a deeper level who you are as a human, but also as a leadership practitioner, to help support and influence others as part of your everyday practice, then this is maybe a program that's worth exploring for you.
Well, as we start to think about summaries and conclusions, what do you think would be some of the key learning points that people should take away from this podcast, from your course, and from the ongoing education that you offer?
The feedback we've had from learners is that they didn't expect the leadership development program to have changed them as people. But actually, this is what they say they've achieved through the critical pedagogy, not just changing their leadership practice, but actually changing them as people in the world who want to make a difference.
It's doing leadership with others rather than to others, or forcing yourself as a leader into a particular suit of armor or clothes that have been given to you by the environment within which you work. So it's actually to empower yourself to become the kind of leader that you want to be.
And from my point of view, the final note, if you like, is from an institutional perspective. If you're wanting to develop this critical pedagogy for executive learners, you need a team, not a group of people, to make this work. And when I talk about a team, I mean a team that includes academics, professional service colleagues, and the learners themselves, so that worked well together. You need definitely a group of academics who are individually, to start with, engaged and understand this work, so that they can then come together collaboratively and be relational in their practice and not transactional for this to work. And at that point, then you can experience a really rewarding and joyful experience as an academic delivering on the program and engaging with these types of learners.